Okay, so this is the Swift classroom, up close and personal with ISO 20022 messages. So we've had Swift classrooms at Payments Panorama before, and we kind of talked about what is ISO 20022. We went over the messages. We're not going to do that now because you're all experts, right? Everybody knows what it is. And if you don't know what it is, you can come to the Swift booth. We have little books called ISO 20022 for Dummies, and you can pick one of those up. So we won't be going through all those details. So I'm Malene McMahon. I'm from Swift, and I'm joined by Bill Sear from Payments Canada. If I say the other one, do I get a chocolate, or I have to give you a chocolate?
Yeah, I don't know. We don't have the chocolate anymore.
Okay. So I picked up my badge this morning, and my badge, for those of you that have really good eyesight, just says Malene. I'm kind of like Madonna. One name. I thought, this is really cool. I got to go with this at more conferences. Just says Malene. I love that. Okay, let's get started. So I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about ISO 20022 and adoption around the globe, around the world. I'm not going to talk about every single adoption because that would make this session 4 or 5 hours long. So we'll just highlight a few of the things that I thought were relevant. And then I'm also going to talk about something called the ISO 20022 Harmonization Charter, which Payments Canada and the Bank of Canada are both endorsers of. So I'll talk a little bit about that. And then Bill is going to do the rest of the long agenda about Canada. Okay. So ISO 20022, in general, is driven by, adoption is driven by market infrastructures. So the market infrastructures mandate the use of it. They put together a migration plan, and they pretty much push it on their financial institutions. And then sometimes the financial institutions are in a position to push it on their end clients, but actually more often than not, the end clients or the corporates are requesting it from their banks. So we have kind of the banks in the middle, market infrastructures mandating the use of it, and also corporates on the other end asking the banks to adopt it. So today, that is definitely the model of adoption for ISO 20022. In the years to come, it may change, where more financial institutions are adopting it on their own. But today, for the most part, it's driven by market infrastructures on one side and then the end clients on the other. And there are more than 200 initiatives adopting ISO 20022 today around the globe. There's an app that you can go to, and if you Google ISO 20022 in the App Store, I think it's the only app that's there. That's an adoption map of all of the initiatives that have given Swift information about their adoption plans. In the app, there are about 80 of them, and they've given us full permission to publish their information. But there are really more than 200 out there. Payments seem to be leading the way for the most part, with securities right behind, and then a handful in the foreign exchange space, the trade space, and also the card space. We had a lot of exposure to card during this morning's session. And it's really all across the world. It's not any one part of the world. There are large initiatives and small initiatives pretty much everywhere. A kind of a bit of a new wrinkle is that there are, in Europe today, regulations that stipulate you must report to a regulator a particular thing in the ISO 20022 format. So regulators are kind of picking up on this idea now and saying when you report this, whatever this transaction is for this regulatory purpose, they want it to be done in ISO 20022. And there are 4 particular regulations in Europe that have recently done that. The reporting hasn't started yet, but it'll start over the course of the next year or 2. And then, as I said, there are more and more corporates in our ecosystem, in the SWIFT ecosystem. The corporates on our network grew at about 10% in 2015, and they're growing a little bit about the same pattern in 2016. So corporates increasingly are those pulling agents that pull the banks into adopting ISO 20022. Okay, so our little tour of the world. So I started in Asia. Now, Asia is a little bit, of course, every region of the world is different and unique in a particular way. Asia, of course, is not one, it's not like Europe where the countries are attached to each other. Asia is really many different kinds of regions and many different cultures, large countries, many small countries, medium-sized countries. So really a microcosm of the world. And we have a couple of different examples here of adoption of ISO 20022. So I'll highlight what's going on in Australia with the NPP project, the new payments platform, where Australia is implementing real-time payments, and they're adopting ISO 20022. So that's obviously a very large, very important project. And we like to draw parallels with Canada. Australia and Canada have a bit in common, very, very, very large countries with concentrated populations and not as many banks, let's say, as the US. So the parallels can be drawn there. There are many payment adoptions in the real-time gross settlement space in payments. So in India, they're adopting the next generation of their real-time gross settlement and using ISO 20022. And in Brunei, a very small country, also changing their RTGS system and implementing ISO 20022. India went live in 2013, Brunei in 2014. And then we have also some securities examples. I have JASDAQ, the Japanese stock exchange and depository for settlement and reconciliation, and also for post-trade. They've been live since 2014. And then I have the example also of the Australian Stock Exchange, ASX, where they've adopted ISO 20022 for corporate actions. Now, these are obviously not the only adoption implementations that are going on in Asia, but these are just some of the highlights. And the other interesting thing about Asia is they have many of the countries have less legacy than they do perhaps in the more Western parts of the world. So China, which I didn't list up here because there weren't enough circles, you have to draw a line somewhere. China is also adopting ISO 20022 for payments in their SIPS system. So it's easy to see here that ISO 20022 in payments is definitely sort of taking over in Asia. In the Americas, and I still have the old name on the slide. I won't say it because I'll have to pay someone. In the Americas, I'll highlight, obviously Bill's going to talk about what's going on here, so I'll let him talk about that. But we also have in the states, the Fed and the clearinghouse have stated that they are adopting ISO 20022 for payments in both high value and low value. And they've put out a framework of a plan, and they've said they're going to start to build their messages in 2017, testing in 18 and 19, and have said they'd like to do some kind of a live implementation in 2020. My personal view is that might be a little bit ambitious, but you know what? You got to put a stake out there. You have to put a roadmap in place. So great for them that they put that stake in the ground, and happy to help them get there. They're going to implement ISO 20022 for high value first. That's what they've said. And Canada likely to implement it for low value first. So it'll be interesting to see how those two things in a different adoption approach work. There are lots of activities also going on in the Americas and South America. So we have pockets of adoption in both payments and securities, and I highlighted on here Brazil in the investment funds area. And then we also have a lot of adoption in the US market at the depository. DTCC has adopted it for corporate actions and are evaluating it for a number of other processes. So Middle East and Africa, I found mainly payments examples. Again, less developed markets, less legacy. So more aggressively adopting the new technologies because they don't have a lot of the old MT technologies ingrained in their back office systems. And that's on the payment side. So Jordan has been live since February of 2015. The South African Reserve Bank is under discussion to redo all of their payment systems in South Africa. And the Southern African Development Corporation, I believe that's 14 African countries in the southern part of Africa, or 13 it says, developing it for low-value payments. I didn't really find any securities examples in Africa yet. And of course, last but not least, in Europe. So the earliest adoption of ISO 20022 in Europe was the adoption for SEPA, the Single European Payments Area, which happened actually quite a number of years ago. So that adoption has driven lots of other adoptions. So we have Target 2 and Euro 1 Step 1, which are the high-value payment systems in Europe. They're talking about adopting ISO 20022. All the payment systems in Switzerland are going to adopt ISO 20022, both high-value and low-value. And then we also have a couple of examples on the securities side. So we have a group of CSDs in the Nordic countries that are adopting ISO 20022 in the security space, and then, of course, T2S, Target 2 Securities, adopting ISO 20022 for their new processes. And that started in 2015. So all of this adoption has happened across the last 6, 7 years, shall we say. And each infrastructure creates its own set of rules. When they implement the messages, they implement a particular version. And what this has created is a little bit of a fragmented adoption across the globe. So some of the large financial institutions came to us and said, you know, I think maybe we need to think about harmonizing some of this. Just the way SWIFT dictates every year that the MTs are going to change and holds everyone to a single version of it, maybe we need to think about doing the same thing for the ISO 20022 messages. So we put together a harmonization framework and a charter. And what the financial institution said is, first, we'd like less variation in the way people use the messages. We'd like everyone to comply with global market practice, if there is one. In some market sectors, there isn't one, but if there is a global market practice, let's always use that as our starting point. Let's try to get everyone on the same version. Now, that's going to be a bit of a challenge, and we'll have to give people time to catch up. But by doing that, we give people a predictable environment. And if you're a large financial institution and you're dealing in many countries, you don't have to use version 2 here, version 5 here, version 7 here. You can use the same version. So it helps lower your cost of interoperability. And then, since all of these folks are adopting, and we get lots of questions about who's adopting what messages exactly are they adopting, when are they going live, let's publish and share this information. First, among the infrastructures, and then secondly, among the community, so everyone knows what's coming, who's adopted what, and who's using what version of what. So this kind of drove what we call our harmonization charter. So the charter has sort of 3 or 4 main sections. First, information sharing. Let's publish what all these infrastructures are doing. What messages are they using? What versions? Are they live? Are they testing? What are their plans? So that everyone knows what's going on around the world. And then let's adhere to market practice and also use the latest version. Now, obviously, we need to be a bit flexible here because SEPA, for example, implemented version 1 or 2 of the messages, the payment messages, back when they adopted. And those messages are now up to version 6 or 7. So it'll take a little bit of time, but in principle, everyone agreed with this. It's a great idea. All of our financial institutions agreed, let's do it, and we'll see how quickly we can gather that sort of momentum. And then let's release them all on the same day, like the third weekend in November when we have the MT standards release. So that you have predictability, you know when it's going to change, it changes at the same time every year. Now, as you know, sometimes messages don't change. So if there's no need for a change, messages don't change. But if there is a change, let's do it in a predictable way. And then last but not least, publishing the information about your adoption approach on the My Standards tool, which Payments Canada have already done. So sharing the information about what you're adopting. So this is the charter that we put together. We have 30 market infrastructures today around the table that are part of this agreement, if you will, and we're growing that number. So we're reaching out to more infrastructures to support the charter. So over time, we hope to have a more harmonized way of adopting ISO 20022. Okay. You're up.
Thank you, Malene.
Welcome.
So now, you've heard all about what's happening around the globe, but I know this audience wants to know what's happening in Canada, where are we going, and how are we going to get there. So allow me to elaborate on our ISO 20022 journey. This really started back in 2011 when the Payment System Task Force identified ISO 20022 as sort of our go-forward message in whatever Canada does. Project work at the CPA started in earnest in February 2013 and continued all the way through to December 2015 when our board approved our ISO messages for AFT, our rules for that, and the framework around it. And in April of this year, April 18th, we published those messages and the rules along with our messages for EDI and LVTS. Those are available on the My Standards portal as well as our website for anybody to use. For AFT to use, EDI and LVTS needs a bit more of a concerted adoption, so modernization, the program that CPA has initiated. Look, I just said CPA again already. I say CPA a lot, yeah. The last session I was at, we gave out chocolates. I got no chocolates for you this time, but I will say CPA a lot because, well, I've been there 15 years. But yeah, so we've published the messages for AFT for use and for EDI and LVTS for information purposes. So why did we go down this ISO road? The biggest driver for this was enhanced remittance information. Today's AFT standard has very little data in it and zero room for growth. We tried that once years ago. It got nowhere. EDI's got lots of room for data. It's even structured data, but it's not really widely used. It's in a lot of market verticals, but it is not widely adopted, and certainly not down to the consumer level. And LVTS got a little bit more room for some data, but it's not structured, so it's really not good for any kind of reconciliation. Single standard support, that's another big driver for us. I just mentioned the 3 standards we're supporting, so it's burdensome on the Payments Canada to support 3 standards. It's burdensome on the banks to support these, and it's burdensome on the corporates who use all of these. They all have different languages, different nuances, so moving to an ISO standard when we get there, that'll be a single message standard to support, and all the data underlying it will be formatted the same. Straight-through processing is another benefit. Now, we have that today. In all of our messages, we're doing straight-through processing. But what ISO allows us to do is take that one step further and into straight-through reconciliation. And in a utopian world where you're getting all of this great data all the way around the chain, you might even have automated reconciliation where there is no human intervention. The payment comes in with all the data needed to go, yep, I got all my payments, great. That's where, ideally corporates would like to get to. Domestic interoperability, this is more about our standards are drifting away from standards. Some of the non-mandatory fields in our AFT messages have been used by banks for proprietary needs or for corporates for some proprietary needs. So when we try to use those and make the industry adopt them, we can't because they're sort of drifted away from a true standard. So adopting ISO 20022 will allow us to get back to that true standard, and hopefully with all the definitions and all the rigor that is around ISO 20022, it will stay a standard for a long time. Finally, global interoperability. Now, ISO 222 themselves is not going to allow us to send cross-border payments seamlessly because there are different flavors of messages in every jurisdiction. But using the same building blocks domestically will certainly allow us a much easier road to adopting and sending those cross-border messages, because it's just how you assemble those building blocks. They're all the same, it's just the order you put them in and what's mandatory that facilitates that. So that will help global interoperability, as well as a lot of things Malene mentioned. We're managing our standards today in a global context. We're part of the harmonization charter. We don't want to be stuck on version 3 for the next 6 years like some jurisdictions, not to mention any names. We've committed to moving to newest versions. When we built our messages, we used those global market practices where they were. We used the high value payment systems market practice to develop our ISO messages for LVTS, following those global market practices where we could. And anytime we made any changes where we deviated from the norm, we always looked at what are other jurisdictions doing? Are these decisions going to affect global market practices? And so we were very cognizant of that when we built it and when we continue to manage these. It could be. I mean, they haven't built their messages, so we don't know what they're going to look like. They've just started talking about.
Yeah, so the good news is that when they start to build, they're going to work with us to help them. We did the same thing with Payments Canada. So they will start with the global market practices, and obviously they know that they have to, kind of align with what other folks have done. So I'd like to say definitely yes, they will be aligned, but like Bill said, they haven't started yet, but we're going to make sure they're on the right road.
Swift is the police.
On the right road. We don't often like to be the police, but sometimes it fits. No. Sometimes.
And they definitely helped us. Anytime we got to a fork in the roads, we're very clear about, well, if we go this road, this matches up with everybody else, or you could go this way. And so we went that way. Again, we tried to do our best to sort of.
I mean, sometimes there's a good reason that you have to deviate from something because you have a very particular requirement, and as long as everyone understands what that's about. But for the most part, the whole idea here is to harmonize the way people use the messages.
So we were challenged a bit when we built our messages. We weren't changing the clearing and settlement framework. We weren't changing LVTS when we built these, so we had a bit of a constraint. We weren't changing how AFT transactions move or are settled. So we had some constraints we had to work in, but we did look for opportunities to make them better, and the enhanced remittance data is one of those, and I'll get to that. But yeah, we had some constraints because we weren't building brand new systems. So we started with a like-for-like approach, but made changes where it made sense and where we felt it added benefits. Yeah, go ahead, Shaw. Yes, we are. So our goal right now is to move the whole industry on a regular basis. Now we've still got to work, I said goal very purposefully on that one. We've still got, these aren't in use today, so we've got to get the industry engaged, not that they're not engaged, but on this process of when do we move. So we want to get some working groups together and work with the industry to figure out what is the best. Do we automatically go every year like Swift is proposing? Do we wait? But we don't want to get to that point where we've got different standards, especially domestically. I don't think we can support multiple versions domestically. I think we all will need to move together, especially if we're also implementing on LVTS as well. And I don't think we want we don't want a version for AFT and a different version for LVTS. So I think domestically we're all going to have to move together, but again, that's work that still needs to be done. And again, I would like to see us adopting these messages on an annual basis, but we've got to get the industry buy-in on this process. And given that they haven't even implemented them yet, it's hard to get a buy-in on how we're going to update to the next version. So when we built our messages, we built them using version 4 for the payments and clearing and settlement messages. We're up to version 6 for those right now. We are in the process of reviewing the changes between version 4 and 6, and we're going to move our standards in that way. There's a working group that's already been established to look at those. So even though we're not live, we're already moving to version 6. Just version 6 wasn't available when we built ours. Version 5 came out shortly after we finished, and we made a conscious decision to, we worked on this, let's publish this knowing we were going to move, and nobody was adopting yet. So it was a conscious decision, but we definitely want to stay in that harmonized world and move with the rest of the world as versions change. Any other questions before I continue with the journey? Okay, so on this journey, what have we accomplished thus far? So I've talked a lot about the messages that we built. We had 3 working groups, one for each of our payment streams, AFT, EDI, and LVTS, and we went through element by element every payment message and looked at them and do we need this in Canada? How can this work in Canada? Where is the mapping to our existing standards? So we did all of that and built these messages, which are now available for either use and or viewing on our website. We did a legal analysis to ensure that introducing ISO 20022 in the domestic market wasn't going to come with any unintended consequences, and that legal analysis came through fine. There were no problems with us taking this broad leap. We attempted to build a cost model. Obviously, banks don't know how much this is going to cost them because they don't even know what they're building yet. So we worked with one of the large consulting firms to put in a bit of a model on how we might attempt to estimate what it will be for the direct participants in our systems. We didn't go to the indirects and or the corporates. That was just too much of a big exercise for us to tackle. We did a lot of consultation. So before we went out to public consultation, we held 21 sessions with more than 200 people. Some of you in the room, Hugh, were at some of those sessions. And just going through our messages, some of the policies that accompanied them and the rules, just to make sure what we had built was indeed going to meet the market demand. Then we went out for a 2-month public consultation with all of our messages and rules and framework. And all of that feedback we heard ended up in the final product. We did a lot of research. Again, with SWIFT, we wanted to know what other jurisdictions were doing, what benefits were being derived, and what challenges were being had, so we could learn from some of the really early adopters in this market. SEPA was a very early adopter, and we certainly learned a lot from some of their challenges that they had. We did a bit of a cost savings analysis on, what happens if checks were eliminated because of ISO. And that paper is published on the Payments Canada website. I almost did it, but I caught myself. I'm getting good. Just alluding to what banks might be able to save if checks are eliminated because of the introduction of ISO 20022. So I encourage you to read that paper if you haven't. And finally, all of our outreach and education. When we started this journey, outreach was, what is ISO 20022? How do you say ISO 20022? Is it 222? Is it 200222? So we really started the groundwork, and we all read the ISO for Dummies book that Malene talked about. And that moved into sort of a more, how are we going to build this type of education? What can we do with it? And this is now morphing into a bit of a more industry outreach. We're talking with stakeholders. We're talking with ERP vendors as we speak to get our messages built into the software. We're keeping the industry engaged and really trying to drive that adoption, and that's where the CPA's modernization initiative is definitely taking over. When they figure out what they're building and when they're going to build, ISO will be part of that, and so they're really engaging the industry and driving where we go. So I talked about that number one benefit, the remittance data. So don't confuse this with things like amount and date and who it's from and who it's to and account numbers. That all exists in any payment we've got. When I talk about remittance data, this is sort of some of the net new stuff that isn't carried into today's messages. ISO 20022 in general comes with 3 buckets, if you will, for including remittance data. We've got unstructured, structured, and related. Unstructured, we've built it to sort of allow 140 characters of unstructured data, free format text. It's a tweet, if you will. The use case we see most often for this is business or government communicating to the consumer. It's not limited to this use case by any means, but we certainly see the biggest version. A couple examples that I can think of, your payroll company, especially if you are being paid on an hourly wage. Your payment today comes with some dollars in it and it works fine. They could communicate your hourly wage. You worked 40 hours at regular time, 5 hours at overtime, a couple meal per diems in this unstructured. So now when you get your paycheck, you can be like, oh, I know how they got that. You don't have to get your pay slip. Your mortgage company, they take money out of your account all the time. Now, they could choose to include maybe the time frame. This is for this month period or this bi-weekly period. Again, these payments happen today, but it makes them a little bit more better if you can get more better. They get better if you can include a little bit more data. And finally, government. So this is where I see, a lot of people go, oh yeah, this is good. The government has not committed to anything I'm about to say, but these are just examples.
Is there anyone from the government here? Yes.
So they have
Be
not
careful.
committed to doing any of this. This is just Bill spitballing ideas. Feel free to write them down, though. So imagine your CRA payment comes in, and they could, put a little bit of text in there. Right now, when they come into my account, I see Government of Canada. I'm like, well, what's the Government of Canada giving me money for? They could put CRA. Maybe they add a little bit of other information. If they happen to be consolidating payments, maybe you get EI and universal child care. Not that that exists anymore, but maybe you're getting two payments at once, and they could break down those. So there are opportunities there for the business to provide more information to the consumer in their payment. Structured is very structured. There are, in the version that we've published, there are 121 sub-elements in there that you could populate, dates and amounts and all kinds of stuff that you can put an invoice, and that's key. So if you want to pay multiple invoices, you can put individual invoice data in this structured and have multiple iterations of this. In fact, we've allowed 100,000 iterations of this, up to 100,000. So you could, in theory, pay 100,000 invoices, put data on each one of those individual invoices, and send one payment through the payment stream. Again, that's the utopian world where all that data moves all the way around and then facilitates either straight through reconciliation or even automated. Of course, the big driver for this one, the big user for this one is business to business. This is kind of the EDI model where there's a lot of data in a payment message, but now this gets to be a little bit broader. The final bucket is related remittance information. That's where the remittance information exists, but it is not traveling with the payment. But you can then point to where that remittance information lives. So if you've got an external portal where when I make a payment to you, I'm going to post all the invoice data on a portal, I can now put a hyperlink to that portal. Or if I'm emailing a spreadsheet to Gladys in accounts payable, I can put Gladys's email in there. So if Rick in accounts payable sees this payment, he knows Gladys has got the Excel spreadsheet. The data lives outside of the payment, but at least it's a link to where it exists. And we know this is useful today because companies are doing this today. So this facilitates ongoing, either while they're migrating to structure, or maybe they're just not big enough to really adopt structured. And this related will continue to work for them. So not only did we enable this in our ISO payments, and again, this is all optional, no payment needs this, but it's certainly there for use. We had to put some rules around how this moves around the system. So what we've said is anybody who adopts ISO 20022, if a payment initiator provides you remittance data, it must move around the chain all the way to the final bank. All the data goes all the way around to the final bank. There is no truncation of data. There's no, you sent me 100,000 invoices, but I'm only going to send the first 50. There's no that. So all the data moves to the last bank in the chain. That final leg from the last bank down to the end recipient, we've taken a bit of a fork in the road. For the unstructured piece, we've said must be made available to the final user. So if you put in 140 characters or up to, it must be made available to the end consumer. For the other two, structured and related, we've said that it must be made available upon request. So that the end recipient of the data must ask their bank, I want this, and then you've got to have a dialogue. How am I going to get 100,000 repetitions of invoices? You've got to have that dialogue. So we definitely see the benefits for the consumer, so that's why we forced the data all the way down on the unstructured. But structured and related, we wanted to sort of ensure that the data was available, but you've got to have that conversation to figure out how that's going to be made. And we've said all of this needs to be made available as soon as possible, but at the latest next business day. So there's no holding this data till the end of the month, if you will, and then providing it. Unless there's agreement otherwise, to do otherwise, which of course, banks and their consumers can feel free to agree to that. I'll pause there because that was a lot of information. Any questions?
There's a paper about this in your little shopping bag that you got about the extended remittance. We did a paper together with Payments Canada,
It was CPA back
which
then.
was known as CPA back then, on the whole extended remittance. Has a lot more information on it if you want to have a look at that.
So another piece of remittance data, and I don't have a slide for this one, we've enabled is what they call ultimate creditor and ultimate debtor. So this is one more step outwards in the chain. So I like to use the franchisee franchisor example. So you could have McDonald's on Main Street buying some goods, but maybe McDonald's Canada is paying that bill. In today's world, it looks like McDonald's Canada bought that goods. But in an ISO message, you can go one step further down that and say, McDonald's on Main Street bought this. This is the ultimate debtor, but McDonald's Canada is the debtor in this chain. And on the back end, you've also got another leg. Both of these aren't mandatory. They are available to use if you need to. So on the creditor side, think of maybe an old age home receiving money from the government on behalf of some of its residents. Right now, they might not get who the resident is. They might get one payment and who knows who it's for. But now you could identify that ultimate creditor as Gladys in room 316 versus just the retirement home getting the money. So again, more data, more reconciliation, hoping for the best. No. Yeah.
So I'm from Europe, Germany especially. And so we have the same discussion in Europe about this very limited 140 characters. And on European level, the related remittance information is corroborated nowadays, but we see some legal problems there concerning anti-money laundering, terrorism sanctions, and so on. Is it a problem here in Canada?
We have.
If you have a link to a terrorism document and the banks are part of this process chain?
Yeah. So we've addressed the harmful links and that how they should be handled and they shouldn't be sent. So banks do have to do a bit of screening before they send those around, as well as personal information. So we've said personal health information can't be published in these because without consent, of course. So we've got some rules around how that happens and how that should happen. It is. We had the conversation. What do we do if this unstructured contains bad words? So there's some work on the bank sides to filter that, but they do that today with Interac e-money transfers. You've got that little text box that you can put bad words in, and they've it happens in EDI today as well. There's structured data, and there could be hyperlinks in there. There could be personal information. So it's not a new problem. It's been highlighted because of ISO, but it's something we live with today, and we're working through it regularly. So it's just more forefront now that we're talking about it. Okay. Any other questions? So where are we on this journey? So I've talked about, we've published our messages for AFT for use in the direct clear space. We've got an onboarding program ready for any banks that come to us and say, I'm ready to start using these. We've got Swift's validation tool, the My Standards Readiness Portal, that we're using with the banks to test those interbank messages. We're building an information security standard on just some details on how that information needs to be kept. And we've got a process in here to manage these messages, whether we need to make a change to the Canadian messages or whether changes come down from ISO, how we're going to manage that. So we're ready to go as soon as the banks are ready to go. On the promotion side, again, I've talked about this. We're driving the industry. We're talking with ERP vendors and corporates to keep the industry engaged. We're doing as much education as we can. We're doing things like this conference where we get to talk about ISO 20022 and just kind of continue to promote it and drive the industry towards adoption. You can now ask any kind of questions because we're all done. Absolutely. They're talking to us. There's a couple that have already put our messages into their software. I don't have the names off the top of my head.
Some of them might be in the exhibit hall.
Some of them very well might be. But yes, we engaged them early on, even in the consultation process. We talked to them what we were building, and most of them were said, yeah, once you get standard done, it's going to take us a couple of months to put it into our system and test it out. And it's pretty easy because they've got other ISO messages already in there. They've got the separate versions and all of that. So it's just put the building blocks together in a different order, if you will. So it's relatively easy for anybody who's already got ISO in their ERP system. So we're doing lots of conversations, and we're trying to get them to adopt it, because again, if they got it in there, corporates will then be wanting it, which will drive the banks to go, hey, poke, 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 I want my ISO.
We do the same thing at the global level from a SWIFT point of view. We're engaging with all of the partner vendors that we work with to make sure that they have the information they need to implement the ISO messages. And each market is different, so they need to be ready here before they're ready here. So vendors are absolutely critical to ISO 20022 adoption. Critical.
If they don't do it, then why would
Yeah.
Yeah.
Critical.
Yep. Yeah, Hugh. Sure. So onboarding is mainly, it is for the banks that adopt it right now for the direct clears. So it's some checklists that you've got to go through, you know, messages that need to be tested, use cases that, not use cases, but sort of test scripts, if you will, on what needs to, what fields need to be tested, what messages need to be tested. Then we've got that readiness portal where you can upload your test messages, and it will run through all of our messages and show you where it's not formatted right, or you didn't include a mandatory field that was mandatory. So I don't know if there was anything specific. Yep, ready to go. Charlie, who's already here, is living and breathing our ISO onboarding program. So yeah. It's ready to use. It hasn't been used yet, but we developed it. It is absolutely ready to roll out as soon as we find some banks who are ready to come on board. Call Charlie. Yep. Okay.
And who are you? Who are you? PNC.
Okay. Yeah. That's the key right there. Is you got to, yeah.
But I do have a question. The standard ISO message, just in terms of size,
Yeah.
considerably larger
Considerably.
than the current standard record
Yeah.
transaction record. So from an infrastructure standpoint, are you giving at least initially, the direct clearers guidance on what that means from a data storage perspective?
We're using the general figure as 4 times bigger without the remittance data. So just taking today's message, converting it into XML, we're using the number in and around 4 times the size. You throw in 100,000 repetitions of an invoice and 121 fields in there. We have no way to estimate how many corporates might want to use that many versus how many might want to use 1 or 2. So we've looked at just the true message-to-message comparison. We're using about 4 times bigger. So we're communicating that. Again, they've got to size those pipes, and they've got to know their corporates. What do their corporates want to send them? And even some corporates don't know the answer to those questions. Yeah. Yep. So the goal is to fully ISO enable the entire market on all 3 payment schemes. We haven't done that yet because we can't put an end date yet. We've got this thing called modernization that doesn't know precisely what's being built or when it's being built. That's why we rolled the AFT messages out in more of a voluntary adoption, because most banks wanted to know what modernization, what's the picture look like before I adopt. I need to know what my roadmap is. So we've done a lot of work, so we said, let's publish these. If any bank is dying to use them, they're there to use. But until modernization comes along and figures out what that's going to be, we fully anticipate when they figure out what they're building, there will be an end date for our existing standards. We will stop using AFT, EDI, and SWIFT at SWIFT MT, not SWIFT, those message standards at some point. We just don't know where the end date is. But we're not going to live in a world where we've now just added a standard. We need to delete some standards. I don't have a date yet.
We should have had a polling question
When should we?
on how long a transition period do you think, we should have had a polling question.
We should add a polling question.
On how long a transition period would be appropriate, because, is it 2 years, is it 3 years? Because you gotta have an end, and you need to give people enough time, but you also don't want to give them too much time, because they'll all wait till the last minute. So you have to kind of stagger it and have, phases and all
Yeah.
that. So yeah, we should have done that. Oh
We
well.
should have. We don't have time to write the question into the app. We've got a whole 3 seconds left, so maybe I'll fire off one more question, but I'm certainly around all week to answer. Oh, we got a battle here. I'm going to go with the gentleman here in the back.
One of the benefits that has been raised is that ability for the banks to create new products or services on top of ISO
Yep.
20 or 22. So any cases of modernization that you've seen from global adoption that has been proven that actually banks are able to monetize some of that remittance data?
I'm looking at you.
Yeah. So in Europe, across the SEPA landscape, there's something called additional optional services. It's called AOS. I remember seeing this AOS. So a lot of the banks are packaging additional optional services and sharing remittance information in different ways, at different times, in different formats, to conform to what the clients want. That's probably the biggest additional service that the banks are doing today. Other things you can do is, faster payments. So you can offer your clients a service for a little bit more, where you can guarantee a delivery at a certain time. So you can fool around a little bit with the timing. That actually has very little to do with the messaging standard, but more to do with how you've enhanced your application as you've adopted the standard. So those are 2 examples that we're aware of. I think what's going to happen, though, is banks are going to be creative now. So now is really when people start to think about, because until you actually see it, you don't really know what some of the opportunities are. So that's where the creative innovation comes in. Once you really start to adopt, then you'll find those new things that you can do.
More data comes more opportunities.
Yeah.
Do you think this will drive interday clearing instead of what we do?
Are we thinking more on the ACSS side of things? So what will really drive interday clearing is the principles for financial market infrastructures. That's going to change interday clearing because there's a clear mandate there to have same-day clearing and same-day settlement. And ACSS was just designated as a prominent system of importance by the Bank of Canada. So that system now falls under those PFMI principles. So that will really drive at least the settlement portion. Will ISO drive clearing? I hadn't pondered that. Unless we build the new clearing and settlement system, in today's world, the adoption of it won't change clearing. We're still going to change AFT files. There's still going to be 2 deadlines for those. So I don't see it changing clearing in the short term. Modernization will definitely change clearing, or I suspect it will. So yeah, I don't. Yeah, for modernization, but we could maintain today's clearing system with ISO messages.
They're designed for clearing. That's what they're designed to do. And whenever you make a change, there's always an opportunity for an additional change. So it's easier to say, okay, we're doing all of this. Oh, maybe we can add on this other bit. So again, that's where the innovation and the additional change comes in. Yeah, it's possible.
So I know we're standing between you
we're
guys
done.
and lunch, and I don't want to keep any. I think so. Yes, it's lunchtime, so that's why I wanted to end this promptly. I'll stand up here for more questions if anybody wants to come up individually. And thank you very much for coming.